So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to fill in my header and nav section. So I'll just begin to scroll down and find things that are going to be part of header and nav, and I will just cut those and move those up. So I'm just going to move everything up there first. Come in here underneath my comment. I'll paste in these. Obviously there's a lot of cleanup to do here, but we'll deal with that momentarily. And here's the header and the logo. And then here's some rules for Nav Links, and then Nav Home, Nav About, Nav Gallery. Those are all the names of my navigational elements. And here's some hover rules. So there's actually quite a bit of stuff. I'm going to get all that. This actually is inside my media query, so I can't move that rule, even though it has to do with nav. I'll leave that within the media query. We're just going to do these rules first, and then I'll just paste these in. And then I need to find a way to structure these. So once again, I'm just going to kind of go through, look at my selector names. I've got a lot of things that start with the class names. And you can see that I named all of my elements like nav contact, nav home, nav about. I did that in the HTML so that when I went to make the CSS, it would be very obvious as to the names of all of the links. That's just going to make things a little bit easier. So these all have consistent names. They all start with the word nav, and then it's going to go ahead and populate the name of that particular element. So you can see I have nav home, nav about, nav gallery, nav contact. So we'll go into the CSS, and it looks like header is going to be the first thing. Header and logo will be the first elements that will appear, so I'm going to cut those and I'll just put them at the beginning of my section. And then let's just see if we can clean this up. We have text align, we have clear, we have margin top. So let's just reorder this so that it's going to follow our alphabetical order here. There's really no way for me to create any shorthand because all of the rules are pretty short right here. So we're going to leave those as is. Then we have width and height. I like to leave width and height together, so this doesn't follow our alphabetical rule, but this in my case is an exception for the rule just because it doesn't make sense to separate width and height. I want those to kind of hang out together. And the same is true with like minimum width. Now you can see here I have two declarations, which is redundant, and this one is actually going to overwrite height 30%. So you'll find a lot of times in CSS that maybe you added something, you were testing it or whatever, but you want to clean all this up. So we don't need this height right here. And actually it makes sense to define our width, then our minimum width if that exists, and then our height. So I'll leave it in this order. The next thing that I'm going to do is I have a nav, but because nav wrapper is something that actually wraps around my navigation, I like to put that before the nav. So I'm just going to cut the nav wrapper rule and I'm going to paste that in next. And again, this is already in the format. We kind of did that before, so I won't make any changes there. The nav declaration though needs a lot of help. So I can do a couple things here, starting right with the background color. It's using black, which is 000000, but when we use the hex values that are web friendly, we can reduce those down to 3 characters. So, I mean, yeah, you might be thinking, it's only 3 characters, but why not eliminate that whenever possible? So anywhere I have those long characters, I'm going to reduce those down to be as short as possible. So we're going to use background color, then I have some stuff for font weight, font variant, and font family, all that good stuff. And do I even need this? I actually have a global rule that's setting the font to the Maven Pro, setting it to a weight of 400 at 100%. So some of these things are things that I can probably eliminate. I don't need this rule anymore. That is unnecessary. So I'm just going to get rid of that font family rule right there. And I don't need font style or font variant. They're normal by default. Font weight is something that is not normally 700, so that is something that I'm going to want to keep. So I'll keep that, but I'll move it up a little bit. Then I have height. I'll put that underneath my font weight. And then I have my text align center, and then I have a bunch of these margins and padding settings. I can eliminate a bunch of these lines by just using shorthand. So let's change this to margin instead of margin top, and then let's use shorthand notation. So my margin top is 12%. Next is going to be my margin right, which is 5%. Then bottom, and I'm using -1%. And then left is 5%. So if we write it like this, it knows this is top, this is right and left, and this is bottom. So these three all can be deleted. And let's look at our padding. We have the padding on the top, and then the next declaration is going to be padding on the right, which is 10 pixels. And then I have the padding on the bottom, 5 pixels. And then I have the padding on the left, which is going to be 10. So again, I can eliminate 3 of these lines just like that. So you can see that we've gotten rid of a slew of these lines and shortened up this rule quite a bit. It used to be a lot longer, but now I've consolidated everything into something that's a little bit longer. So the next rule that I'm going to do is probably going to be the Nav A, which is any link that is a child of the nav. Before I do that though, you'll see that I have these specific selectors, which are declaring the rules for Nav Home, Nav About, Nav Gallery, and if we look through these selectors, we got a lot of the same stuff happening. We have margin on the left and the right. That's redundant. It's happening on all of these. We have a padding on the top, same. We have the background image, that's different. Okay, for each of these, that's going to be different. Background size, contain, background repeat, no repeat, and background position, those are the same on all of these selectors. So instead of declaring them for these classes, let's declare all of those things right up here in Nav A. This is a selector that will also affect all these guys, and if we can move all these to one location, that's going to consolidate our CSS and later make it much easier for us to make changes. So let's go ahead and do that. In Nav A, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use shorthand for a lot of these selectors right here. So let's use a shorthand for background. And we're going to go ahead and specify that we want to have no repeat. And we also are going to put our position, which in this case is 0% and 20%. So those are the same, 20 pixels. Those are the same values that are being used on the background position. So now we can get rid of these. Background size, contain, is something that I just need to move up, so I'm going to go ahead and move that up. The padding on the top is something that I can just move up, so I'm going to move that one up. And then I have margin on the left and the right. I could move those up, but I think what I'll do is I'll just use shorthand notation here. So I'm just going to set this to just simply be margin. We'll use 0 for the top and the bottom, and then for the right and the left we'll use 2%, just like that. And that looks like it's it. So what that does is it's going to shorten these selectors too. Now they are only going to need to be one line long. They just need to declare the property of the background image and specify what that needs to be. So that's going to be true for all of these. So let's go ahead and just shorten these all up. See, my CSS is going to shrink drastically just by cleaning up some of this code a little bit. All right, perfect. So now we have those there, and the next rules that we have defined are going to be for the hovers. Now again, if we look at these rules, we have a specific selector, Nav Home Hover, Nav About Hover. They're all the same. So instead of using Nav Home Hover, let's change this to just be Nav A: Hover and specify the color as being white, because that's going to be true for all of these, and then we can eliminate all of these guys right here. Okay, so that's going to shorten all of those up quite a bit and get rid of those guys. Let's save this and let's test this in the browser and make sure it still looks good. So all of these things are rules that we made on the navigation. It looks exactly the same. Here's the one we were working on before, and this one's actually a little bit more spread out, and that's because later I decided, yeah, I wanted to do a little bit more room, especially when this gets smaller in the mobile size. These get a little tight. So again, because I made these selectors more consolidated, if I want a little more space, I can just change it in one location instead of changing it for every single property. So if I just change this to 3% and I refresh, you can see that now these are more spread out, which looks more like the original. So that looks much better, and that is just a global change that I changed throughout. So now when my screen gets wide again or large, these still stay spread out. So you can see that now I was able to consolidate a lot of those things down. And I just like to have a couple extra spaces before my next section right here. So you can see that this is coming together nicely. We've consolidated a lot of the rules and made it much shorter already. We're eliminating content, even though we added quite a bit of stuff up here. We added a bunch of lines of comments and all that, but our code is shortening up considerably, just a result of us making more clean selectors. So the next thing we'll do is we'll look at the main body content and we'll populate that area.